Hello and welcome to Forgotten Cello Music, episode 54. This is part 4 in an exploration of counterpoint, taken from Quarenghi's very large cello method. Part 4 is all about fugue. If you've been listening along, you know I've already done 3 episodes in counterpoint, starting with the 5 species, then imitation, then canon, and now fugue. What is a fugue? The most highly developed form of contrapuntal imitation, whereby a theme proposed by one part is taken up in succession by all participating parts. Found in Baker's Dictionary of Musical Terminology. This is episode 54, and as I've said, it's a 4-part series, and this is part 4. I like to explore these tangential elements naturally embedded in the exploration of music, mainly because it has a lot to do with Bach and how important Bach features in a classical musician's life. This is taken from Quarenghi's cello method. It's an incredibly large work that deals with everything from how the cello was constructed, where it came from, i.e. cello history, many different parts of technique, even some cello, some theory, as in this counterpoint. So what is the purpose behind this music theory-oriented series? Well, as I've said already, it's about Bach. We play Bach, but we don't really understand how Bach wrote. Sure, we hear things like sequence. Bach is all about sequence. He was old-fashioned. He wrote in the old style. He wrote in counterpoint. Listen to the voices. But do we really understand what it means and what it entails? And number 2, Quarenghi wrote his own composition for all of these forms. In fact, throughout the entire method, there are hundreds of compositions that he wrote just for this method. It's just incredible. It's astounding to me. This is Forgotten Cello Music because Quarenghi did write the 5 species examples. He did write the cello duets for imitation, canon, and now in this episode, the fugue. Well, let's get right into it. What is a fugue? What are all the parts of a fugue? Well, I'm going to do a very basic explanation, a very basic exploration of this form, this intense form. A fugue utilizes all elements and techniques in the contrapuntal arsenal. You need to recall the 5 species of counterpoint. Of course, those are the most fundamental elements. And then imitation and canon, and of course now the fugue. The fugue is, of course, more involved and more sophisticated than any of the other examples I've explored so far. It's very detailed, and a definition is certainly needed. And for those, again, I turn to Baker's Dictionary of Musical Terms and an old Groves version from about 120-30 years ago. Fugue, number 1, the most highly developed form of contrapuntal imitation, whereby a theme proposed by one part is taken up in succession by all participating parts. The word fugue is presumably derived from the Latin, and I don't know how to pronounce it very well, but I'm going to say fugue. If anybody has a better pronunciation of that, let me know. And that is a flight, which aptly characterizes the chasing and changing of the subject through the several parts. Here are the elements essential to every fugue, and there are 4: subject, answer, countersubject, and stretto. Now, to the previous 4 essential elements, there are a number of others, and I'm going to name another 4, although there are more. But I'm going to explore a little bit of these particular 4. That is an episode, organ point, or what I think I learned it as pedal point, coda, and codetta. A little bit about the 4 essential elements of a fugue. The first one being the subject. Without the subject, we have nothing to build our fugue from, so we must have a subject. And that is a usually short and suggestive phrase of music. After the subject is announced alone, it is taken up by the next part or the next voice, which is called the answer. The answer comes in at a different interval, usually a 5th higher or a 4th lower than the original one, that is the subject. As the answer enters, the voice that was playing the subject normally continues on, but playing a counter subject along with the answer. So, for everything that we're talking about right now, for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of sticking with the arrangement style from Quarenghi's method, it will all be 2-voice or cello duet. There can be more than 2 parts, but we are not going to explore any of those 3-part, 4-part, or however many parts. Now, after all the parts have entered, and of course in our example with Quarenghi's fugue, we have 2 parts. The initial section, that's called the exposition, is succeeded by an episode. Now, an episode is a section that is usually derived from the subject and the counter subject. It modulates into related keys. Now, jumping all the way to or near the end, or preparing to go to the end, the fugue may be concluded by a stretto. And this is where the subject and answer begin to overlap. And it's following in closer and closer succession. That is, the subject enters and the answer comes a little sooner than it did at the beginning. And then if there's another stretto, the subject comes in and the answer comes in even quicker, even closer to the beginning of the stretto, and so on, until you're nearly playing at the same time, which you will see in Quarenghi's own example. This also occurs frequently above an organ point. Now, in our case of Quarenghi, we'll discover that it is after the organ point. And finally, there is a coda, which is a general finale or ending using freer counterpoint. We now will listen to a few examples. I've got some very simple, basic examples that we can listen to that are, I guess you could say, exercises. They're taken directly from the dictionaries that I've referred to already, the Old Bakers and Old Groves. So at this point, let us listen to a number of generic examples. And for the generic examples, they are simply tonic dominant. There's nothing that needs to be explained. I think you'll get it. It's just coming in. If it's the tonic, it comes in on a C. If it's the dominant, it comes in on the G, generally speaking. And I will play at this time 3 examples of the most basic form. As we continue, let us look at a number of famous examples. Groves is great. It is almost like a textbook in its own right. Here's the first one. Handel, Hallelujah from the Messiah. Just 2 measures. Jumping to Bach, a contemporary, of course, of Handel, we go to maybe the most famous example of Bach's contrapuntal prowess, the art of the fugue. And these are numbers 5, 6, and 7, all in succession. And here they go. Suffice it to say that when you're dealing with counterpoint, you can always utilize various methods or tricks to make the subject or the answer just a little bit more interesting. So in number 5, we had the answer by inversion. In number 6, we had the answer by inversion and diminution. And finally, number 7, we had the answer in inversion and augmentation. For the last famous example, let's jump back to the Messiah. This is a wonderfully powerful example. Every time I play it, I usually get shivers or goosebumps, or however it is. It's positive regardless. And he shall purify. Here is 4 measures of the subject and 4 measures in the answer. I did that obviously just to get you acquainted, in case you thought, oh, I don't know fugue, I'm not sure, but actually you do. Okay, now let's go on to Quarenghi's own fugue for cello duet. We need to prepare our ears for Quarenghi's original fugue, included in this method. Let's listen to just the subject, and then just the answer. And where I left off there begins the counter subject as the answer joins in. Now let's listen to just the isolated answer. So we have an 8-measure subject. That's rather lengthy, but it's a nice little melody to listen to, and I think you'll grow to appreciate it as I did, as I was working on it and thinking about all the different aspects and parts to this fugue. I'd like to address the labeled sections. What he has actually labeled in his cello method of this composition. You can see it printed on the page. We've got subject, answer, and counter subject. Then he labels a divertimento. And then he labels episode. Number 4, or the next one, is imitation of the subject. Then we have to skip over some pages. Now only 3 pages from the end, he begins, or only 2 pages from the end, he begins a pedal point. Then finally, we get into the series of 3 strettos. And listen carefully. Listen for how he makes the answer enter nearer and nearer to the beginning of each stretto. I'm not going to tell you how many half notes. Remember, this is in cut time, so we're counting in 2. But can you identify how many half notes or how many beats go by between the first note of the subject and the first note of the answer with each successive stretto? 3 strettos. Now, finally, he labels a largo. He oddly does not put it, label it as coda. And I would have thought that that would have been labeled. But it obviously is an ending, so we can call it a coda. Here is the entire 6-page fugue for cello duet by Guglielmo Quarenghi. Well, I don't know about you, but wasn't that really magnificent just to hear that? I don't know, it's almost spine tingling in a way. It's not only a plagal cadence at the end in the largo, in the coda, but it's a Picardy third. That's pretty cool. I actually wasn't expecting that from a 19th century composition. What did I glean from this closer look at counterpoint? I think it for me, it's necessary to actually say it. What did I get out of it? You know, I made a big deal about actually taking the time to study counterpoint because of one of these massive roadblocks in my brain, and that was I didn't learn it when I was learning, taking cello lessons and in college. Yeah, I said already we had to learn counterpoint. It's separate from the cello, but we never dealt with it specifically in cello, despite the fact that Bach was such a huge factor in cello playing. I mean, it's on every audition. It's expected to be played in nearly every or many of your recitals, official recitals for degree. So why don't we learn about it more? Anyway, what did I learn in my short and cursory study of counterpoint? What I can say for absolute certain as to what I learned is that I can identify the basic parts, species even. I can identify these building blocks, note against note or two notes against one, moving on to antecedent and consequent. I can identify imitation. I can identify the subject and the answer. I think I can even identify an episode now, which was, I think I could feel it, but I don't know that I would really be able to identify it or would have been some years ago, or even, 3 months ago? It's interesting because, in a way, this study gave me a little bit more impetus or more of an itch to learn more than, oh yeah, that's enough. I think I can live my life. I can get by. I enjoy Bach enough. I'm not going to play Bach that much anyway. But I don't know. Part of me says that, but the other part also says, oh, it'd be really nice to justify my frustration by actually learning it myself. And anybody is going to tell you that if you're going to learn anything, you do it on your own, right? Not to say that the teachers don't guide you, but you actually have to put in the work and be interested in it. And so I'm not going to promise that I'll do a study of the Bach's suites for cello. Definitely not all 6 anytime in the near future, but I might consider doing a study of the prelude from his suite in C minor, the 5th suite, where it houses a fugue. So that's a possibility. We'll see. First, I'm busy primarily with learning as much forgotten cello music as I can. And of course, I always have in the back of my head that learning all of Guillermo's music for cello and piano has been a goal for a while now. So I might get back to Guillermo in a little bit. We're actually in the cello history book that I've been reading and taking lots of these names from, the Violoncello and Its History by Vasilevsky. I think Germany is either the next chapter or the next chapter in the 19th century, and that is right where Guillermo is located. So might be a really good excuse to have a glut of Guillermo's music for several months. We'll see. Why don't you write in the comments if you want to hear more Guillermo or don't? Well, folks, this brings us to the conclusion. I am officially done with my studies in counterpoint. It was quite a tangent, and it was a bit cursory, even though it took a long time. It certainly was not that in-depth, but it was important to me, and I learned enough to at least temporarily satisfy my need to know, if that makes sense. But, I mean, it was worth it, too, because you got to hear 3 forgotten cello pieces, namely Quarenghi's Imitation, his Canon, and his Fugue. And, of course, if you want to count those 5 species of counterpoint, but that's, just 8 or 16 measures worth for each one. So it's not really a composition, but in the sense that it doesn't have a theme. It's not really going anywhere. It's just showing us the aspect of the species. The following episode will resume more cut and dried presentations of forgotten cello music. Now, if anyone is listening out there, please let me know. Have you found these past 4 episodes interesting? Well, in general, how did you find them? How did you experience them? And, of course, the podcast in general. Let me know. It'd be nice to hear more people and how they experience what they're listening to here. Thanks already to the people who have sent emails to me. I get one email every now and then, it's really fun to hear comments and hear thoughts and hear what you're doing. Anyway, send me an email. You can do that at travelingcellogroup@gmail.com. You can leave a voice message at my podcast's homepage, anchor.fm/travelingcello. Now, if you listen on Spotify, which would be just fantastic if you did that, you can leave a reply to the question, what did you think about my exploration of counterpoint in these 4 most recent episodes? And just write a short thought. Last but not least, I have had very little luck getting patrons in my Patreon, but a sincere thank you to those that have joined. I hope that you feel it's worth your money. I'm just finding and searching for ways that I can make a living, and of course I teach cello, and that is my bread and butter. But if any of you have been thinking about it, it's been in the back of your mind, I encourage you to go look at my Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description, and really consider joining at the $3 per month tier, because that's the first tier that you can get a sticker, some merch, and it's a sticker, and you get it after 3 consecutive months. Thanks so much for listening to this episode about Fugue in counterpoint, based on Guglielmo Quarenghi's cello method. See you for the next episode, and remember to play more forgotten cello